Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are in our second supplemental session on Friday, September 5th. We are going to do a few things with Chapter 1 today to finish up Chapter 1. First of all, I did want to emphasize this. We talked about this in class. This is Exhibit 1-6 in your book, and I would make sure that this is on your sheet for the exam. This is an excellent summary. First of all, that the financial statements are listed in order, the way they have to be prepared. It has to be the income statement, because the income statement feeds the net income to the statement of retained earnings. And then the statement of retained earnings feeds the ending retained earnings into the balance sheet. And then the balance sheet feeds the cash balance into the statement of cash flows. So the statements are prepared in the order in which they're listed there. In the left-hand column, the main question that statement answers is listed. And in the right-hand column is a nice summary of basically the format or equation for that statement, or what that statement structure is like. So that's an excellent summary, and we did that in class, but I wanted to say again that that's a really good summary of what in this chapter. So on my exam note sheet, that would be on there for sure. And I just wanted to mention, we did not cover this in class other than to say that it exists. The statement of cash flows we will do in a later chapter, much later, chapter 11 or 12 or 13, somewhere in there. But I wanted to just show one. This is actually an exhibit in your textbook. Exhibit 1-10 has a statement of cash flows, and you've got cash flows from operating activities, cash flows from investing activities, cash flows from financing activities. So they're grouped into those three categories, not particularly something to memorize yet. And then at the bottom, you've got this change in cash, and then what was our beginning cash balance, what's our ending cash balance. And so you were trying to show, as a business, what happened to cash, what's with cash, where did it come from, where did it go. And that will be coming up in a later chapter, but I did want to say that exists. And what we're going to do today, just reading, when you look at the PowerPoints, know that when we talk about decisions, when we're using accounting information to make decisions, decisions are impacted by the economics, which are basically how the dollars work out, by the legal constraints that we have to operate within the law, and then the ethical concerns. So while some actions might be economically profitable and might also technically be legal, they may not be ethical. So this is looking at loopholes and things like that. So we have to make decisions within these three constraints. Now, what we're going to do today is we've got this homework exercise. This one's actually, I think, an identical match to your homework. And then we'll do a couple really good examples of the material in the chapter just to kind of summarize it. So in this homework exercise, exercise 1-19A, we have to decide for each of these items which statements these items would be found on. And the answer can be one of them, two of them, three of them, or all four statements. So we have the income statement, the statement of retained earnings, the balance sheet, and the statement of cash flows. Again, I've listed those in the order in which they would be presented. So let's just give it a shot. Let's try revenue. So in the chat window, does anyone have an idea for which statement that would be on? The income statement, the statement of retained earnings, balance sheet, or statement of cash flows? I see an answer being typed. Okay, when we think about revenue, what a good reference point on this would be actually at Exhibit 1-6. That Exhibit 1-6, which we started today with, which were the summary of which financial statements. And again, if you had your exam sheet right now, because this is likely to come up where you say, I say to you, which statement or statements would something be found on, you would on your sheet hopefully have a sample statement from each of those ones that we did in class. So we had an income statement, a balance sheet, and a statement of retained earnings. So the income statement, when we think about income statements, the basic format for an income statement is revenues minus expenses. So revenues minus expenses equals net income. So if we have revenue, the statement that revenue is actually going to appear on is the income statement. So again, we look at an income statement and we see revenues minus expenses equals net income. So now I think you get the idea of what we're doing. Okay, so the next one, item B. Okay. Item B, dividends. So we think about what statement or statements item B might be on, and the best way to do these is to rather look at the statement. Now, in this one, we look at income statement, and we said income statement never, ever, ever has dividends on it that we pay. Our dividends do not impact net income. The balance sheet doesn't have dividends on it. But what we do see is we do see dividends on the statement of retained earnings. So this one's statement of retained earnings. Also, I will tell you that it's also on the statement of cash flows. If you look at a sample statement of cash flows, dividends are a cash item. So when this is on the homework, know that it's going to match what we're doing here. So even though we're not doing the statement of cash flows, we can at least acknowledge that this is on the statement of cash flows. I will not ask you one of these that relates to cash flows on an exam. Okay, so the next one, item C, ending cash balance. Yes, ending cash balance. Yes, absolutely. That is an excellent answer. Also, it's on one other statement, and this one again is the statement of cash flows. So yes, your ending cash balance is going to be on your balance sheet. That's what we end up with on the. We have a lot of ending balances on the balance sheet, and then we also see that on the statement of cash flows as well. Okay, the next item is on one statement, total assets. And again, if we look at our statement, balance sheet, yes, I was waiting to see that. Okay. Now, next one, we haven't discussed the specific expense, but E, selling general and administrative expense, the statement that would be on. And I'm going to go forward with that one. Oh, I see someone writing. Yes, you are right. That is absolutely right. It is the income statement. Yes, that was a good guess. When you see expense, because we think about the income statement being the revenues minus expenses equals net income in general. So generally, many times if we see the word expense, it's on the income statement. There is an exception. Prepaid expense is actually an asset. So you have to keep in mind there are a few exceptions. Prepaid expenses are things that are paid ahead of time, like prepaid insurance expense is insurance that's paid for a year in advance and you haven't used it yet. That's an asset, so it would be on the balance sheet. But when we have an expense, it goes on the income statement. Now this next one, I'm going to give you adjustments to reconcile net income to net cash provided by operations. Yes, that's a mouthful, and we haven't specifically looked at that, so that would be the statement of cash flows. So just know that that's statement of cash flows. If you look at a statement of cash flows, you'll see that that's like the second line on it, second or third line item on it. Okay, item G, I'm also going to give you, and item G is also the statement of cash flows. And the reason that's on the statement of cash flows and we say that it's not on anything else, the cash spent to acquire the building, that's actually listed on the statement of cash flows as something we did with our cash. The cash spent to acquire one thing is not one of the balances on the balance sheet, and it's also not an expense. So it is simply on the statement of cash flows. Okay, next one, I'll throw it out there for you now. This one is not the statement of cash flows, H. So current liabilities, what statement would current liabilities go on? Balance sheet is absolutely correct. Okay. Current liabilities are those liabilities that come due within a year or an operating cycle. Next one up, I, income tax expense. We just had this one, so I'm going to go ahead and expense again, income statement. A lot of times you see something expense, some kind of expense, that's an income statement. Now, net income is an interesting one because net income appears on several statements. Actually, it appears on every statement except one. Oops, except one. Net income is going to appear on the income statement because that's what we end up with. It also appears on the statement of retained earnings because it's one of those adjustments. And then finally, it does show up in the statement of cash flows. But again, if you get this kind of question where it says, what statement would this item be on? Your best strategy for dealing with that kind of question is to look at your sample statements. And the ones that we did in class on Wednesday, we did an income statement, we did a statement of retained earnings, and we did a balance sheet. Those are good example ones to have on that sheet because you can answer most of this type of question. And again, on an exam situation, I'm not going to ask you about the statement of cash flows, but you do need to know that it exists. Okay, next one. The next one down, K, common stock. Anyone have an idea on that one? It's on one statement. Yes, that is absolutely right. The common stock is on the balance sheet. Yes, yes. Okay, now item L, ending balance of retained earnings. I'll give you a hint. This is actually on two statements. So what's one of the statements the ending balance of retained earnings would be on? Yes, the statement of retained earnings is one of those. So the statement of retained earnings is one of the statements that the ending balance of retained earnings would be on. The other one is yes, and balance sheet. Yes, got it there. So what we'll see is we'll see the balance sheet and the statement of retained earnings. And the balance sheet lists all the balances of assets, liability, and equity. And equity is composed of pretty much common stock or paid-in capital and retained earnings. So that ending balance is going to be on the balance sheet as well. Okay, next one, item M now, income tax payable. Any ideas on which statement that's on? That's on just one statement. And yes, that is correct. It's on the balance sheet. Again, if something says payable, we can be reasonably confident that that's going to be a liability. And then the final one, long-term debt. What statement would that be on? It is on one statement. Yes, and you are absolutely right. That is the balance sheet. Okay, so that is one of the homework exercises, and I believe it does match exactly. There aren't any numbers in this one, so I think you can zip through that pretty quickly on the homework. what we're going to do now are some pretty good little exercises. These are going to help prepare you for exam situations or additional practice. So what I have here is I have a data set, this ABC company data set, and I actually have 3 different questions with this one data set. So what I'm going to do right now is just pause for a minute. If you want to jot this down, this is a lot of jotting down, but we are going to use that same set of information for 3 questions coming up. So you could probably abbreviate these pretty well. AP for accounts payable is pretty common. And then we have cash, common stock, cost of goods sold, dividends. So I'm gonna go quiet for a minute. I'm gonna try to do this. It's hard to be quiet for a minute, but I'm gonna be quiet for a minute. You can jot those down because then we're going to go through 3 separate questions. Yeah, and if you want to put your answer in the chat window, I see we have 1 answer in so far. Another one, great. And you should be trying this, especially if you're watching it later. You should be trying these on your own. This is a safe way to try them. There's no penalty for getting it wrong. And one of the best ways to learn, and research shows this, is to try a problem and actually get it wrong, but then get immediate feedback on what's right and what's wrong. In this case, we have a couple right answers in the chat room. So the total assets for the company at the end of the year. So what we're trying to do here is we need to go through the list of accounts. And we have to pick out anything that's an asset. So I'm going to go through the list and just identify my accounts. Accounts payable, that represents monies I owe others. Haley, I need you to take over. You're going to have to pick up right here. Can you do that, please? My people are here early.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Haley,
yes.
You're good? I'm turning off audio. I'll be back as soon as I can be.
Okay.
You'll have to do app share to move this along.
So, okay. Okay. Okay, hello, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So, as Dr. Tietz was mentioning, to get the answer for this question, first what you're going to do, well, the answer is D. First what you're going to do, you're going to add cash for $74,000, the equipment for $50,000, and inventory for $25,000. Those 3 accounts are the only assets out of all of these accounts listed on the list. So that's how you would calculate the answer. Okay, so for question 2, this question asks for total liabilities. So total liabilities for the company at the end of the year, I'm going to give you guys a minute to go ahead and try to calculate that, and then I'll go through the answer. Okay, so the answer to this question is again D. 45. It's 45,000. So to calculate total liabilities, what you're going to do, you're going to choose the liability accounts out of this list. So the liability accounts on this list are accounts payable for 12,000 and long-term debt for 33,000. So once you add those two numbers together, you'll get 45,000. Give everyone a second to write that down. Okay. Okay. So now this question, it wants you to calculate net income for ABC Company. So again, I'll give you guys about a minute to try to calculate this. If you've calculated the answer, go ahead and type something in the chat room. All right, so we got a couple. All right, so to calculate net income, what you're going to do is you're going to take your revenues and you're going to subtract your expenses. So the answer to this is A, 83,000. And how you're going to get that, you're going to take your revenue, as I mentioned, this $200,000 figure, and you're going to subtract cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold is an expense that's usually your main expense, and that's 85,000. And then the last expense that we have on this list is salaries expense for 24,000. So once you subtract that, you should get 83,000. And I'll give you guys a second to write that down again. Oh, actually, I think, oh, okay, actually, I think that is a calculation error. It should be 91,000. So the answer to this should be B, 91,000. Yeah. Did everybody get that? I'm sorry, that was a calculation error. It should be B, 91,000. Okay. So this question again, it wants you to calculate the net income or loss for the year. So I'll give you guys a minute to try to calculate that. Once you've calculated the number, you can go ahead and type it in the chat room.
Haley, I'm back. Do you want me to take over?
Sure.
Okay.
Dr. Teets, just to let you know, the answer for the last question, oh, you fixed it. Thank you.
Well, the answer for the last question was what, 91,000? Right?
Yes, it was 91,000.
Oh, look at that, magically. So just to reiterate for anyone watching this later, this is the correct answer for that last question. I'm going to go forward. Sorry about that. I think it actually, when I imported it, that box, that text box moved.
It just moved up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is this where we are right now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're seeing some good answers here. And remember that net income is the revenues minus the expenses. And we're going to see the 38,400. Okay. So 38,400, we have to pick out the expenses. Revenue is an expense. Cost of goods sold, by the way, is an expense account. It's one of the largest expense accounts, but it doesn't say expense in it, but that's assumed that it is expense. I mean, it's implied. You never see cost of goods sold expense, but it is an expense. So that's one of those things to make note of, that cost of goods sold is an expense. Dividends are never ever part of expense or part of net income. Okay, we're going to go move on to the same data set, new question. Now we have to compute the amount of ending retained earnings. And just to give you a heads up, ending retained earnings will be our beginning retained earnings plus our net income minus dividends. That's how we compute ending retained earnings. So wait for a minute while you give that a shot. Now just, notice that I copied down the net income from question 1 here. Okay, and then on this one, our ending retained earnings will be, our beginning balance is 51,000. Our net income from the first one is 38,400, and our dividends are 7,000. So we subtract those out. Haley, I'm going to put up the next, you're right, Alexis. I'm going to put up the next question, and then we'll wait for a minute while people try it. I have to run for a minute, but I'll be right back. But you might start talking if I don't get right back.
Sounds good.
Okay, next one is the amount of liabilities at the end of the year. Haley, you take over for a minute, but don't do app share. I'll be right back.
Okay. once you guys calculate an answer, you can go ahead and type it in the chat room so I know you're ready.
Okay, anyone have the liabilities at the end of the year? Now, liabilities at the end of the year, what we first have to do is we take our accounting equation of assets equal liabilities plus equity. And remember, we can just call it equity, or we can call it stockholders' equity, or shareholders' equity, or owner's equity if it's a sole proprietorship. And then we can break down further stockholders' equity into common stock plus retained earnings. So what I've done in that second line there is I have modified the accounting equation. And then I'm going to fill in what we're given. So assets at the end of the year were $205,000. We don't know what liabilities were, but we have common stock. Common stock is $85,000. Retained earnings came from question 2, $82,400. So we had to solve for liabilities. And this is probably one of the more difficult ones you'll ever see here. And if you can handle this, you're in good shape. But knowing the accounting equation is critical. You need to know how to manipulate it to solve for the unknowns. And so assets equal liabilities plus equity, and then knowing further that equity is common stock plus retained earnings at this point. So that's how you get to this one. Okay, so now we've come to the end of the prepared material for today. So I'd like to throw it out there if anyone has any questions. Just a reminder that if you're in sections 1, 2, 7, or 8, the homework that's due this week is Chapter 1, Part 2. We covered a couple of the homework problems last Friday's optional session. We covered a bunch in class on Wednesday, and then we covered the one today. If you're in Section 3 watching this later, remember that you have a quiz in My Accounting Lab since you're not in class to take the quote-unquote pop quizzes with Learning Catalytics. So I'd like to open it up. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer? If you're good, we are done with this supplemental session. Thanks for coming. We plan to have these pretty much all semester. And so it's a good idea to come or to view it later if it doesn't work in your schedule. We realize many people cannot attend at 8 a.m. But thank you for stopping by. And I hope you have a nice weekend.